What's up guys, I'm Zach and welcome back to Workshop Edits and welcome to episode 8 of my tiny office build series in my backyard. Today's episode is going to be all about laying down vinyl flooring. Again, something I have never done before in my life, required a lot of research and prep on my end, but overall, an actually very straightforward, easy process as long as you follow a couple of rules. I hope all the tips that I provide along the way are super insightful. So let's go ahead and get started. So I'm just gonna go through a couple of tips. I'll probably give some up front and I'll give some as I go. But up front, there's a couple of things that you wanna think about when doing your flooring. One, you should always have like 10% more than you think you're gonna need, just so you have it, you've bought it all at the same time, and there's no differences in having to go back and like purchase a new set from a different store that might have a different humidity level. It'll save you a lot of time and pain in the end. You can always return the extra that you have. It's 10 millimeters thick. It has a under laminate protection barrier, meaning that I do not need to put down any sort of like vapor or moisture barrier, especially with this build. Now, if you are in a place that is like a first floor on top of a basement, or you are on top of concrete, or you are like the second floor in a house that is like above a kitchen or a bathroom or somewhere where kind of like moisture can rise and collect, you might want to consider adding some type of moisture barrier. There's a bunch of different kinds. There's different thicknesses. They have different characteristics like moisture protection, soundproofing, like if you're on a second floor, and a couple other things that you just might want to do your own research on when it comes to like the specific application of your laminate flooring and what that laminate flooring recommends and what it also comes with built into the flooring. They often come in repeating patterns. So each box that I bought has 6 different pieces. They're 7¼ inches wide by 48 inches long. And I can tell already there are roughly 6, maybe 7 different types of patterns. So what you want to do is open up as many of the boxes as you think you're going to need for a specific room and actually sort your pieces so that as you're building out your floor, you're pulling from different piles so that the pattern itself is sort of as varied and staggered and different as possible. Like the last thing you want is like 2 pieces that look the same right next to each other. It's just going to end up looking kind of odd. Now I have the benefit of a new construction building, meaning that I was able to strategically place all of my drywall a 1/2 inch off the ground, and anywhere that it was like a little bit lower, I just went with a multi-tool and like a 1/2 inch spacer block and just cut off that bottom. So all around my perimeter, there is a 1/2 inch gap. This flooring is 12 millimeters, meaning it is just under 1/2 inch. Now, when you are installing this flooring, whether it's new construction or it is replacing a current floor, the one thing that you want to make sure of pretty much above everything else is to account for expansion. The bigger the room, the more expansion you probably have to account for. You can buy these pretty cheap kits. I think this was like $20, and it comes with all of the tools that you're gonna need to account for that kind of stuff. So that includes a block that allows you to hammer your pieces together, a block that allows you to pull your pieces together when they're butting up against a wall, and it comes with spacer blocks. Now, the recommendation for the flooring that I'm using in the space that I'm using, if you are up against a wall, to add 3/8 inch of a spacing around everywhere. Because what you're gonna ultimately do then is put on new baseboards, which are usually around 1/2 inch thick, and those are gonna go ahead and cover those gaps anyway, so you're not even gonna see them. Baseboards can be thicker than that. There's also a bunch of different methods that you can do to also seal off that gap that you leave. They make rubber foam little tubes that can sort of be inserted in there. You can use 100% silicone caulk to also seal that space. I don't think I have to do any of that for my application. At the most, I think what I'm going to do is get the flooring fully installed and then decide maybe I'll add some silicone caulking just to seal those bottom joists and prevent, I don't know, moisture buildup or things getting into those spaces, or overall just allow this office to have itself like fully sealed off from the outside. The great thing is with it being new construction and having that 1/2 inch gap on the floor is I can basically put my pieces all the way up against the wall. It's gonna make measuring a lot easier. It's gonna avoid me having to use any of those spacer blocks because there's always going to be, if it's flush with the exterior or the interior wall of the drywall, there's always going to be a 1/2 inch gap between the actual base of the flooring and the studs that are exposed down here at the bottom because that drywall is off the ground. So really what I need to make sure I'm doing is just doing everything straight, doing a nice varied pattern and not repeating pieces. One last thing that I didn't know until I actually got into trying to figure out exactly how it's gonna work is when you are doing a transition from a door to your flooring right here, they actually sell very specific, they're called T-trim pieces. They look like this. They come in a bunch of different colors, so you can purchase them to match the flooring that you bought as best as possible. It's probably gonna be not possible to match it 100%. What those do is allow you to have a gap in between your flooring and your sliding door, your French doors, whatever they are, and it creates a nice seamless transition between that door to your flooring. So I got one of those. They sell them in widths up to, I think, like a little over 6 feet for doors that are up to 6 feet wide. And if you're working with a door that's bigger than that, you're probably gonna end up having to order something custom anyways. The best part, and I cannot believe this happened, is what they ask for is a 1 3/8 inch gap between the edge of your first piece of board and the sliding door itself. This gap is exactly 1 3/8. Like I measured it straight, perfect, exactly what I need. So what that means is for my first row of boards, I don't need to do any notching, which is amazing. Like, not that that's difficult, but it just like, it makes the project even easier because this is literally just a box. If you are buying, or if you ordered laminate flooring, vinyl flooring, whatever, they do recommend that if it's coming from somewhere and you can't verify like where it came from, you should let it sit in the environment for like 48 hours. And if you do that, that allows it to sort of adapt to like the humidity in your space. And therefore, when you install it, it's going to be more in tune with the environment, and therefore the expansion or the contraction of it will be more negligible than if you install it and like, again, don't account for the right gaps in things. I just bought mine at the store. It's down the street from me, same weather, same relative humidity. So I'm gonna get to installing. I'm not gonna worry about that. And I also have expansion joints, like I said, with that 1/2 inch around everywhere. So I think I am good to go, but wanted to just say that one last tip. That was a ton of information. There's other great videos out there that lay similar types of flooring, but in different sized rooms, in rooms that aren't new construction. They go with slightly different methodology and give different tips that are more specific to their project and their application, like cutting around corners and things like that. I'll link those. I don't want to like overdo it with information in this because I think mine is relatively straightforward, and I want to kind of keep the information as simple as possible because I think this overall is pretty simple. I am going to take my first row of pieces. I'm going to start in a corner, and I have not decided if I want my very first piece when I walk in the door here to be nice and centered, or I'm just gonna start with a full piece in the corner. Whatever you end up seeing me doing is where I land on it. Regardless, what I wanna do is just rip the tongue off of those 3 pieces at the table saw so I can start with a nice flat, clean edge. It's, again, not gonna be 100% necessary for my situation because I have that gap already. But if you are working with a piece that is going to like butt up against the wall, you're gonna wanna rip that off so that the gap between the wall and the piece is smaller and your trim will cover it, or your baseboard will cover it. I'm gonna go with centered as my first board. And what I'm doing, I've never done this before, but I wanna make sure that I'm marking and measuring properly without actually putting marks on the board. So I'm just using some green tape to take some measurements. One thing that just occurred to me is that because these are tongue and groove like every material is that you can't necessarily use the cutoff on one side to supplement the cutoff on the other side because they have to be oriented a certain way, which I know seems obvious, but it does mean that the cutoffs that I have on each side need to stay on those sides, so I should be very strategic about using those cutoffs more frequently than not so that I don't end up just with a bunch of cut pieces at the end. The other thing that I'm doing, just again to preserve material, is I'm going to first cut these very first pieces to length on the miter saw, and I think that tape also will just help with like making very clean cuts. Then I'm going to rip the pieces on the table saw to get rid of that tongue groove. That way the cutoffs from those pieces again can be used for future end pieces and instead of them being waste because I cut off the tongue on them. I hope that that's clear. Just doing a test fit here on this first one, just to make sure I'm doing it correctly. Having this gap here does make it really nice knowing that eventually anything half an inch inward is going to be covered by baseboard, but my measurements look good. This is nice and centered, so now we can go rip the little groove at the table saw and start laying these pieces down. Because these pieces have this underlayment on it, it doesn't slide that well. Yeah, that's much better. I'm just gonna go slowly because I don't want to scratch the pieces, but they also are scratch resistant. All right, that cut really cleanly on the table saw, and actually it made sense to cut those pieces upside down regardless, because on a table saw, because the way the blade moves and because at least my saw stop has a 0 clearance insert, it gives perfectly clean edges. These float, they're not nailed in like hardwoods to the subfloor in any way, and the weight of it just ends up holding it in place because it's quite heavy as you connect all of these boards. Like I said, no need for me to lay down any sort of like 6 mil underlayment. These come with it. So really, we're just putting down the first one. And the only thing I want to make sure of is that I do it straight across here, basically in line with this front border of the drywall, because that is going to then have a nice even space across the sill here. It's going to be perpendicular to this wall. It's going to fit the T transition piece that I talked about before, and it's going to be trimmed out with wood anyways and baseboards after. This is a lovely little tool, costs about 10 bucks. I talked about it earlier. This is gonna allow me to pull my corners together. The space is really tight, so I'm gonna start over here, lay my boards down, tap them into place either with this, but I also read that a regular mallet could damage the tongue on the pieces. So this kit also comes with this block that allows you to use as a spacer in between, tap it, and because of this gap on the bottom, it prevents the piece from damaging the tongue. If you have a dead blow mallet, it works also. So let's do this. I'm gonna do this in real time. This is my long middle piece. So again, these are snap together boards. So I'm gonna lay my first piece. This isn't the best representation, but you can see tall enough to just slide right underneath there. So again, already have that expansion joint built in place, which is awesome. You can see it slides in over here too. So there's one board. These are snap click together pieces. So I read just going at a slight angle. Get them somewhat attached. Then I'm gonna take this bar, just gonna put it in place here. And lightly hammer it in, and that's gonna close that gap over there. I'm gonna get my last piece that I just cut, clean edge. I'm gonna do the same thing. Again, going at an angle. Wow, that goes together really cleanly, and it's nice and straight too. Awesome. Okay, that was easy. Gonna move on to the next row. For the start of the second row, I'm actually gonna use a cutoff already, or at least I'm gonna test it and see how it looks. So I'm gonna take my piece, come in on it at an angle, give it just a light tap. That seals the gap here, and then I'm just gonna push it down. Take my spacer block, okay. All right, so what I want to do is grab a piece that I haven't used before. I have not used this piece. Make sure the bottom looks good. It also goes without saying, but you want to make sure that your floor is perfectly clear of debris. So like prior to this, I did vacuum everything. I also then took my leaf blower and just dusted out the whole shop. So the way that I read to set these in place is you're gonna do the short end first and then connect it to these pieces. And actually I did just add a couple of shims here so that as I hammered, it wouldn't wanna creep away from me. I'll then pull those back out when I go to do my final row. So let's tongue side this way, kind of get it locked in place. Two. All right, I've got 4 rows done, and I hate that tap block. It like doesn't work, or I'm doing something wrong. But I've watched videos and it just doesn't seem to work. It just seems to damage the tongue and groove, which sort of makes the piece pointless. My advice is get a scrap piece that no longer serves a purpose. That becomes your way to tap in pieces. Just lock it in, and this edge here just becomes sacrificial. Whew, that is working way better. Most difficult part is definitely these end pieces, but I think I'm finally finding a rhythm here. Last tip is, like, if a piece does get slightly damaged, do not try to make it work. It is not going to fit. I've got half the floor done. See if I can knock out this other half. This room is really small, so it's kind of hard to like capture me doing everything. But after the 3rd row, when I got smart about just using the scrap piece, that got so much easier to tap things in place. Because what I was finding was I couldn't hit it hard enough to actually get the pieces to move without damaging them. So sacrificial piece all the way. When I did get up to the ends, you can see I've got this little tiny strip, which I think was sort of unavoidable. I don't think it's best practice to have such a short piece on the end, but what I found was, again, just cutting this tiny little spacer for me to then put the pull bar around. Could hammer it in place, no problem. And now I just need to take the remaining couple of pieces I have, rip them into, I can't tell what that is, maybe 1.5 inches, 1 3/4. And those will be the final 3 pieces, and the floor will be done. So I'll show you what it looks like when I'm all finished. All right, so we just finished up the floor. It looks awesome. And I think once I got into a groove of things, especially using that sacrificial piece, things went really, really quickly. So the last thing I want to do is finish off this trim piece, going from the sliding door to the laminate flooring. So I bought this kit, and it's a 4-in-1 kit, and it actually specifically can be used for connecting 2 different rooms of flooring together, laminate to carpet, laminate to tile, or hard edges like a sliding glass door to your laminate. So I'm not gonna need every piece here. The installation of this is super straightforward. All I'm gonna do is take this plastic piece, then I will snap in this piece into it, also cut to length. Then I can trim around it with the door casing and the baseboards. So this is plastic and vinyl, super easy to trim. This piece, it's probably a little hard to tell, has this little bump on this side. That goes towards the door. Just make sure there's no debris. I can already tell that I hate this. So what I think I need to do is maybe just cut out a nice piece of white oak and use it as just a standalone piece of trim. Same thickness as these boards. Or maybe I can do something with the extra scraps that I have, but this to me just feels cheap. I'll let you guys know what I end up doing. I ended up just ripping an extra strip and using some brad nails to secure it. And I recognize that one of the things that I said at the beginning was we should account for expansion. This place is really small, and there's tons of room for this floor to expand in all directions. So I think just having that there is going to be totally fine. It looks so much better what I had before, so super happy with how it came out. All right, so that is gonna wrap it up for this episode. If you have any questions about this project, materials, process, some stumblings that I went through, or you just want to generally understand where I got some of my information from so that you can combine it with this video and do your own research, please feel free to leave a comment, and like always, I would be more than happy to respond and give you as much information as I can. Now, if you are watching these in real time, make sure that you are subscribed to the channel so that you can be around and be notified when the next video in this series comes out. If you are watching these later on, I will have a playlist linked to every video that is launched right here, as well as the next episode in the series right here. I'll see you guys next time on whatever it is that I'm building.